Hi, welcome to Fireside Snack. Let's grab a snack and sit down to chat. We're Abbi and Gabby, two recovery coaches eager to share our lived and professional experience in the world of mental health and eating disorders. In our time together, we hope to grab a bite to eat and connect with ourselves and each other. Our hope with this podcast is to inspire you to take care of yourself by building a life you don't want to run away from. As a disclaimer, the information shared in this podcast is based on the personal experiences of Abbi and Gabby and is intended for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are seeking support or have concerns about your mental health, please consult with a licensed professional. Enjoy your fireside snack. Hi everyone, welcome to Fireside Snack. My name is Gabby and I'm with my co-host Abbi, and we are a recovery-focused podcast that uses our lived experience with eating disorders and being recovery coaches in the field, and we share our stories, we have a bite to eat, we check in with each other. So Abbi, before we get into our topic today, what are you having for snack?
I am particularly excited for snack today. I have a shaken espresso, those drink things. So had to get the venti and a cheese stick because my grocery store had massive sale on cheese sticks. We got like 6 packs. So I'm cheese stick ready. So this is my snack today.
Okay, so this might sound very like not what the kids are up to, but what is a shaken espresso? Like what makes it? I mean, I'm guessing I didn't say the full title. It's a brown sugar. So they put, I guess, brown sugar in it. Can't see it at all. Also,
holding things off camera, it's a specialty. With oat milk and coffee and brown sugar and some other brown stuff that I think is cinnamon. I don't know. It's a favorite of mine, though. So I feel like I needed the pick-me-up, but
I get that.
Cheese stick is also coming along for the party.
Camera. I had, right before this, I had a little bit of a late lunch. I had leftover Indian food. I had chicken korma, which was incredible, with a little bit of naan bread. Today, I think you're going to love my snack, Abbi, because you literally sent me a text about this a couple of days ago. So I have Poppy soda.
Yes!
I have Poppy Cola soda. So, listener, here is a tiny tale for you before I share the rest of my snack. So I get a text message from Abbi on Friday, and Abbi says, "You like Poppy soda, right?" And I say, yeah, I do. Absolutely. I was also drinking one when you messaged me that. And love she said, Target is having a huge Poppy clothing sale. And so I got a beanie, I got a hoodie. I'm very excited. I wore them last night. I went to an astronomy society event and I wore them to the event. I felt really cool. I always see people wear sweatshirts and vests places, and I'm like, wow, that looks so cool. That's comfort, casual, you look cool. And I did that. So yes. I felt really cool. Target has really fast shipping. Got it in 24 hours. So pretty great life I'm living right now.
And if, Poppy wants to, sponsor us, well, I'll wear a Poppy shirt for the podcast.
Check me out. Yeah. I've got yogurt covered pretzels too, which are my jam. Yes. So I'm going to be munching on some of those during the podcast. But Abbi, what is today's episode topic? What are we talking about today?
So today's episode topic, honestly, when Gabby, you had mentioned this as a podcast episode idea, I was like, oh, how have we have not talked about this, and we haven't. So I'm excited that we get to talk about it with y'all. We're talking about what led us to become recovery coaches and what have we learned being recovery coaches. Somehow we've made it to this point in our podcast lives and not jumped into that a little bit more, but I'm excited for us to share our personal journeys getting into the field and some of what we learned. But Gabby, do you want to jump us off? I get to learn about your journey along with the rest of the listeners for the first time, so I'm excited to listen.
I feel like I'm trying to go in depth, so I'm not going to do like my normal elevator speech of what my job is and where I've worked and all this stuff. I'm going to deep dive into this puppy.
Yes.
So I have been working in the field since 2019. I've been in the recovery coach community. How I stumbled upon this job was I was living in a house with my friends and I didn't have a job. And so me and my friend, we were unemployed for a couple of months together, me and my best friend. And we went camping together and did a bunch of stuff together. But most of the time we were just sitting on the couch applying for jobs. And I came across this job posting that was called a peer bridger. And I had no idea. I'd never heard of that before. I didn't know what it meant. But I read through the job description and it was everything that I already do in my life. I was aware that I had substance use history. I was aware that I had had an eating disorder. I was aware that I had mental health conditions that I was working on, and I was doing it all externally. So I had an outpatient therapist, but I was really just reading books, looking online in different forums and trying to work through some of my stuff. And so when I saw this listing about listening to people's stories and walking alongside them in their journey and using your experience to help guide others, I was like, I'm already doing this. Like, this is what I do with my friends. Yeah, I seriously was like, wow, this posting was made for me. And so I applied, and I had the virtual interview. And I remember, it's funny now because my boss, who we might even interview later on the podcast, she was so intimidating to me. I thought she was like this really brass tacks woman who was a very heavy hitter. And she is all of those things, but she's also the kindest, sweetest, like most inspiring woman that I've ever met. But it's funny for me to think back and be like, wow, when I interviewed for that job, I was so scared. But they had me come up to Denver. I did an in-person interview with the team. And during the interview, they go, are you sure you haven't done this role before? And I said, I've never done this role. I don't know what you're talking about. They're like, every way that you answer our questions is how we try and guide our team and try and navigate the world. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. And so basically our interview was like a conversation, and it was really, really awesome. We were a super small team at the time. I think I was one of 5, and we were working all over the state of Colorado. And I was working out in the community for a while until COVID hit, and then I ended up doing recovery coaching virtually or over the phone. But I was working with folks who were specifically, they were using the ER as their primary form of mental health or substance use care. And then I was also working at the state hospitals with folks who had mental health conditions that were very severe, where they had to be inpatient. And then I was also working for a forensics team, so I was working in the jails, helping restore people to competency. So I've kind of ran the whole gamut with that organization. Yeah, which was very cool and exciting. I also got to build out a youth and family team of coaches. So I would support kiddos who needed help, but I would also work with their family members to give them some tips and insight, kind of like what we do on the podcast, just normalizing the experience. Yeah, isn't that cool? I was like, cool. It was awesome. I really, really enjoyed that job. And like I said, I had a great manager, and she was somebody who really believed in me. She didn't micromanage me. She let me go out and do my thing, but she was always there. We met weekly for supervision, and she was always there to talk me through stuff. If I would get stubborn about something or be like, this client's impossible to work with, this is so hard, she would reframe things for me and make me think about stuff. And she just completely changed the way I viewed people and the world. She taught me how to be strengths-based. She taught me how to be person-centered. I really, really learned a lot in that job.
You were, oh my gosh, no, that's so, I did not know like this stepping stone in your journey. And it sounds like there was just like a wealth of opportunity there, and you like fit the puzzle, just like snapped right in, like you had always been there. Wow.
It's wild because I don't think that I would be where I'm at today had I not found that job and that role. This job was also, it was a nonprofit. It's kind of corporate still, but I had been working for different larger companies and corporations, and I was just like, if you put me in a cubicle, I'm going to freak out. Like, I'm like a bull in a china shop. I'm going to go berserk. And so I found this job, and it was really cool too because I got to become certified. So I'm a certified peer and family support specialist in the state of Colorado. I have been that since December of 2020. And to become a certified peer and family support specialist, you have to apply, you have to take an exam, You have to have 25 supervised hours, have 500 hours of experience, and then take a training course too. And when I say take an exam, I don't mean you're online clicking through modules. I had to go into a facility. I remember I was wearing a beanie and a hoodie. They were like, take those off, take your hoodie off. It reminded me of taking the ACT or something.
Yeah, very serious.
Very serious. And I ended up passing that. And so, yeah, I've been in the role ever since. And then when I ended up working at our mutual company together, it was really a great stepping stone to bring my experience into a more specialized field of eating disorders. So I've really enjoyed it. Brought me closer to recovery.
Yeah. So I'll get to highlight a little more about my journey is, again, I love that we have such different experiences coming in, but I'm not certified. So I'm really curious, how did becoming a certified peer and family specialist, how did that change your experience in coaching?
I think one of the greatest things that it allowed me to do was the training around being a certified peer and family support specialist really allowed me to hone in and specialize what it means to be a recovery peer, recovery mutual support, whatever, recovery coach. It really allowed me to hone in on the role so that I could create boundaries around the role of what it was not. Because I have this in my notes here, it's very, very common for peer specialists, family support specialists, recovery coaches to get pulled into more clinical or administrative roles. They get tagged into so many things that are outside of their job descriptions. In my experience as a peer bridger, peer support specialist, I was working alongside a clinical care manager or case manager. And sometimes they'd be like, can you do this paperwork? Can you get this thing signed for me? Can you schedule this appointment for this person? No, I can't, because my job is to be a mutual support for this person. And if I start doing administrative things for them, it changes the power dynamics of our relationship. And so I would think becoming certified, one, I learned a lot about the role, but two, I was able to stand my ground in the role and be able to build up a foundation of what I want this role to look like for myself, which has been very, very important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the drift within positions can't get spoken about enough. I've worked, multiple places, but something that caused me to leave a job in the past was experiencing some trauma related to being in spots that I was not trained to be in, and all of a sudden needing to navigate contacting people who were, and it's beyond stressful. So I think that talk about protecting, especially in a position like a recovery coach where our job is to connect in so many ways, when we get outside of that, there's some really scary situations that can happen, which is why it's so important to put those boundaries in place.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed my previous company so much because they were really important about continuing education, because when you're in this field, things are constantly evolving. So I was able to get trained on motivational interviewing, like how to plant the seed for somebody else that they would like to make a change happen, because we know that a lot of change happens internally and people have to buy into it. And so how do we plant those seeds? I got to learn mental health first aid. I got to learn verbal de-escalation. So it was really beneficial and allowed me then to be able to go out and grow and try different recovery coaching avenues that I might like more. And I don't know if you know this about me, Abby, but I was a trainer for a while as well. So I trained recovery coaches too. So I would be the person who would help with the hiring, and then I would be onboarding them, and I created the curriculum for them too. So I've done all kinds of different recovery coach things, and I've liked every second of it. And right now I'm currently on a hiatus because I was doing it for 5-6 years, and it can take a lot out of me. And so I'm just kind of enjoying my time and traveling and spending time with my partner and our family. But yeah, I'm curious, now that you've heard my story and kind of my Jill of all trades recovery coaching, what was your experience like?
So me getting into recovery coaching, it's just a little different of a pathway. I think the best way for me to start describing is to describe the reasons I became a recovery coach. As I've said before on the podcast, I've spent a lot of time in treatment, and oftentimes there would be one person in a treatment center, in the ER, in an ambulance, that my mother calls Esters. They're people who, despite all of the circumstances, really step in and are part of the reason that I'm still here with us today. So I admired Esther's, my Esther's, is not even the right word. I really truly owe many really powerful people my life, because they were there in these circumstances that were really hard for me, sometimes really traumatic for me, but they were there. So I knew pretty early on that I wanted to get involved in mental health. I didn't know in what capacity. And after going through treatment, and I came out and then was secure in my own recovery for a while, I was really interested in becoming a therapist. And one of the ways that I knew I wanted to do first, that was frontline work. So I went back to the last treatment center I was ever at for my eating disorder and asked for a job, which I think threw everybody for a loop. I was the first client to show back up and say, "Hi, hello. Yes, this is still me. Can I work here?"
I'm better now.
I cannot be more grateful for the manager who really gave me that opportunity. That's a big jump for someone to come back years later. Still, you don't know where I've been. I have been doing well in recovery, but it's a big leap. And that role was a behavioral health technician. So not really any clinical or direct client support work, one-on-one, but more milieu general support. And it was transformational in my recovery. I worked with people fellow techs that were my techs when I was in treatment there. There was an Esther that I worked alongside. It was this idea that in a space like this, I can advocate for needs in a unique way because I understand what it's like to be a client in this facility, in this treatment center, just in the world in general. So it was this sense of not obligation, but it was a fire was lit that not only do I want to be a support in the space, I want to use my lived experience to be a support. So I worked at that job for a long time. I was able to advocate for changes that I knew were important, changing the size of gowns as someone who's come into recovery in a larger body size before, during, and after. I didn't see a lot of people like me in treatment spaces showing up like that, advocating for people's needs. I just fell in love with it. I knew that this was the field that I wanted to stay in, which I was unsure of before. I was unsure if I could go into a recovery as a recovered person, enter into a space and be safe there. But I was really surprised by my ability there, and I wanted to start to shift over to more of the recovery coaching role. So I got the job that I've been at now and work one-on-one with clients. I've appreciated the training I've got there. I also do research work. So my end goal is to move into a clinical psychologist role, which is I have some years of education down the road, but I really have just found a passion for being able to use my lived experience as well, which is not something that as a therapist or psychologist is really recommended, because there's that clinical role that I happily don't provide. As a recovery coach, I have other things to offer, but my experience coming into recovery coaching was maybe a little more random. I went from being a tech, proving to myself I could, feeling connected in the environment, to moving into a space where I'm doing more direct support and I'm continuing to learn. I haven't been in the field as long as you, Gabby, but it's one I think I'm going to stick in, y'all. I really enjoyed the experience of recovery coaching and getting to work with clients.
It really does fill your own bucket up at the same time. And I think it reminds me of, if you don't know something, teach it. I feel like that is something where I'm able to hone in on my skills even more by being able to explain and share them with others. I think your story brings up a very good point of almost feeling imposter syndrome in these roles because they're not clinical by nature. And so it is relying on a lot of you to be the person who's guiding these conversations and who's guiding the education and the resources with the individual that you're working with. I remember when I first started in the field, I was in my early 20s, and I was working with people who were significantly older than me and had significantly more severe substance use and or mental health conditions than I did. And I remember going to my manager and being like, is it okay that I'm here doing this and talking to people? I mean, I've had all kinds of shenanigans happen, from being handed drug paraphernalia to having clients be inappropriate and all kinds of different things that I've experienced. And I remember my boss just saying to me, all that matters is that you show up. And not just saying that, we physically just go there and we're there, but just continuing to show up, because so many people who I've worked with do not have consistent support or people in their life who would even be interested in asking how they're doing. So to have somebody who shows up and is present, even if I don't have that exact experience, right? Even if I don't know specifically what you're talking about, I can, if I'm here and I'm listening to you and I'm present, I'm going to be able to empathize with what you're saying because I'm here with you and we're in it together and you're sharing emotion with me and I can pick up on that emotion and we can be in the stuck muck together. And so I'm wondering if that was ever something that you thought about, Abby, when you were starting off in the role, was like, holy cow, am I okay to be here? Like, is this gonna go well, kind of thing?
Yeah, especially my first job as a tech. So not quite coaching, but as a tech, it was this constant fear that, oh my gosh, I'm going to get found out. Like they're going to look at me and go, wait, I forgot that it was really you who did XYZ and we need you to leave. And I lived with this just terrifying sense that I needed to make up for the harms that I had caused, myself, the difficulties that I caused staff in the treatment center that I worked in. It weighed really heavily on me, the thought that I have to be the best because I've been a client at my worst here. So that was a big struggle with me, a big challenge. And even as I have moved into more recovery coaching spaces, I've had to remind myself that lived experience is experience. I have a sticky note on my computer that says lived experience is experience. I'm allowed to be competent and confident in the work that I provide because I do. I show up. I've pursued the education. I have mental health first aid certification. I've pursued education for myself. I show up authentically and I'm allowed to say that and be secure, but was a huge obstacle when I first started in the field.
I love that you have that sticky note on your computer. I'm almost like maybe I need to get my expo marker and write that on my mirror because I think it's so true. And I think that speaks to one of the biggest things that I would say we see in our field is having an equal seat at the table alongside clinical folks. So, we have this lived experience that we're bringing to the table. We can empathize with the clients that we're meeting with. However, there might be some folks who we work alongside who have never been in that position, who have only really garnered education or knowledge around the subject by reading it out of a textbook. And it's a very, very different experience, right?
Yeah.
It's also different to be somebody who's working administratively and clinically, and then we're the people who are dealing with things on the front line. And so I think it's very difficult when you first get started because you're like, holy cow, it feels like this person's life or their recovery is in my hands and we're working together side by side. And at the same time, one of the most freeing things about getting into the role is remembering I'm competent, I'm going to go, I'm going to show up, I'm going to bring my best, but ultimately it's up to you to decide if you want to do these things that we're talking about every day. And so one of the mottos that my manager at the time and now my mentor and friend shared with me that I hold very closely is that I will never work harder than the clients that I serve. So if I come to a point where I'm spinning my wheels and I'm like, oh my gosh, we've gone over this thing 10 times and you're still doing the opposite. Why is that? Eventually I go, all I can do is just be here. I will just be here while you make the same mistake and we see the same outcome, and I will keep trying to show up and support you. but I will also be honest with you that this is a
Yeah.
thing that you are doing and this is a behavior that I am noticing. But I will never give people advice on what they should be doing with their life. I try and stay very peer, very mutual, which I know can sometimes be difficult for recovery coaches. Yeah.
It's actually a question I was hoping to chat about today, Gabby. How do we, if we are working through our lived experience with people, how do we hold boundaries? Because there is an inherent, if we're in a peer role where we're, we have our lived experience, we're supporting another person, how do we maintain boundaries and stay in a peer role versus a friend role? I think that's something some people question, is it possible? There are ways, and I'm sure you have like some great insight, but I wanted to ask it because that might be coming up in folks' minds.
Yeah, I think that is one of the most difficult parts of this job, is that I will always come like with my head in my hands and be like, I do not have the answers for you. I do not know what you should do. I will tell you what has worked for me and what things I've learned about, and I'll like bestow some of that stuff onto you, but ultimately it's up to you if you decide to take it or not. I think for me, some of the biggest things that I have followed and that have been helpful to me is that I set my boundaries initially. I will typically have, if I have a client that I'm working with one-on-one, I will come off in our initial conversation and I will tell them about myself, what I'm like as a coach, because I think they should know that I'm kind of goofy and I have stories and I'm more collaborative in the way that I work. But I will also say things like, I'm not always available. I will never give people my personal phone numbers to contact me on if we're working in a professional capacity. I don't add people on social media. I don't make myself available all the time, not only to my clients, but to my friends and family too. I'm not, I'm not just at everyone's disposal, even though we have these little devices that make us available 24/7. But I think it's a lot better to set those boundaries off initially as opposed to trying to walk them back later on. Yeah, curious your thoughts, Abby.
The way I would explain it to somebody is where we may have shared experience, I'm on an open book. So there are plenty of times that I ask the question, if, let's say, I really connect with what a client is saying, would me sharing something feel good for myself, to feel connected, to show connection, or is this beneficial for their recovery? And that's like a great defining line that I use all the time, whether it feels like a complicated situation or clear cut. I'm always asking myself that, because there are times where me sharing what it was like to go into treatment, very helpful. We're going to dispel some fears. We're going to talk a little bit about the process. But my job is not to make people feel comfortable by sharing my experience. I can use it as a tool, but it's not going to always be my answer. It's just there. I'm not obligated to answer things about myself that I don't feel like are beneficial. So you might hear that I'm in recovery. You might hear that I went to treatment. If someone were to ask me, oh, how many years? Or like, tell me the dates of this, that, and the other. Can you tell? I don't really feel like that's been.
What are your diagnoses, Abby? What are your diagnoses? What substances did you use to use?
Because those are all the questions that we always get.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, no. Like I'm open and honest that I have this experience, but I don't need to qualify my recovery, and I don't need to qualify like none of that. So there's very clear lines of connection, but never solution, and not friends. There's going to be things that I just absolutely am not going to talk about, and I'm okay with standing firm on that. For people that don't know like a clear line or haven't had an experience where they've worked with someone who is also in recovery, it may feel murky. Thankfully, we both have the experience and training to know that there is a very clear divide between having personal experience and selling like snake oil magic, because we happen to have lived through it ourselves.
Absolutely. I think what you're saying goes back to a powerful adage that's always talked about, is I won't share something that I haven't worked through myself. I will never talk to you. People will not know what's going on in my day-to-day personal problems, because that's not what we're here to work on. I also love that you said that I don't have to qualify my experience. I think, and I've seen this happen with you, Abby, in our previous job, But because we're younger and we're recovery coaches in the field, there are folks who expect us to prove ourselves. Or, you're a recovery coach, you've gone through it, well, prove it. What's your actual story? What did you actually deal with? What substances did you use? How much weight did you lose? All of these really intrusive questions in an attempt to almost prove that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Nobody will ever understand me. And so I'm going to ask you these really intrusive questions to prove my own point that you will never figure me out, which is very, very common in our field.
And the point of a recovery coach is not to have someone with the exact same experiences with you. There can be a benefit from someone who understands a little bit differently, who's had a history with some similar things, but I will never have the same experience as any client I work with. And I'm open about that all the time. Yeah, I've never been through that. I can't say that I completely understand, but I hear you. I see you. This is really tough. This is crappy. I can validate all day long, but I won't pretend that I've gone through the exact same thing to make it seem cleaner, easier, because it's not needed.
Well, I think the biggest thing is just having somebody who's there, who listens, who cares about you and wants to see you doing better, who will set those boundaries with you, who will be honest with you. Every program that I've also worked with, besides our most recent one, it was voluntary. So people voluntarily got to work with me. It wasn't you have to do this to get out of probation, or you have to do this, that, and the other. It was always a voluntary thing, which was also really cool too, because you knew that people were showing up each week because what you were saying was impacting them in some way, shape, or form, which I really enjoy. I guess we're kind of talking about our youth and how we've been asked to prove ourselves in the role. I'm curious what other common fallacies you've experienced or noticed while being a recovery coach in the field.
Expecting answers is something. And then also I have two different client experiences that usually in the first session, like, we need to talk about. And one is that I have a second therapist, and nope, in every first, I'm like, I am not a therapist. I can't give you therapy. My role is completely different. The other side is I don't think someone that doesn't have clinical, like a degree with their name, has any worth. So navigating that, it's an interesting either or, like, you are going to be my therapist, or because you're not a therapist, I can't do anything with you. So yeah, navigating that I see a lot. And then people's assumptions that it's supposed to feel good because I'm not a therapist. We didn't laugh today, we didn't have fun today, and it's like, we can definitely do that, and there's something really serious going on that we needed to chat about and just talk. What's a plan we can make? And just because I'm not a therapist doesn't mean that we can't talk about serious things, and that sometimes it's going to be challenging. Gabby, what about you?
I think that's a really good one, is that because we're not clinical by nature, we don't serve any yeah. What? So you're just Gabby? You're just Gabby who I talk to every Tuesday? And it's like, yep, that is me. I think that's a very common one. I would say also that there's this common misconception that we will always be on the client's side, or that it's us against the team, which I've seen very, very often happen of well, Gabby, you know why I'm struggling. You know what? Can you go back to this person and tell them that I need this? Or asking you to advocate on their behalf about certain things. I won't do that either. I always tell people, if you have something that you want to share or something that you want to say, you should say it, because it's a really useful skill to be able to advocate for yourself in a big way. I thought of another fallacy while I was talking, so that's exciting. I sometimes don't think that I can have thoughts and talk at the same time, but I think another common fallacy is that we can't mess up. As coaches, as therapists, as dietitians, as all of these professionals in the field. I don't know why we are professionals, but I don't know.
Yes, no.
But I think there's this common idea that we have all of the answers and we won't mess up at all. I have messed up so many times in my job. I have said the wrong thing. I've made a joke. I've let a boundary slide that I shouldn't have let slide. And every time I do that, I think, gosh, I'm like the worst person in the world. I can't believe I made this mistake. And you feel all of this internal turmoil and chaos. And in reality, you remember that you're a person. Mistakes is part of us learning and getting better at our jobs. And so I think the biggest thing is to be able to learn how to make mistakes and repair them. Yeah. Instead of trying to push them under the rug, instead of trying to say, well, I'm the professional, so what I say goes. Never. What I say goes until I say otherwise, because I know that I'm going to mess up. And I've had clients who have told me before, you've hurt my feelings, or what you said last week didn't sit well with me. And we'll talk about whether what I said was actually like a hurtful thing, or whether they were just uncomfortable with some of the insight that I had given them. And so I think it's learning how to make mistakes while also repairing relationships, which I think is a very big skill for people who have not had relational repairs shown to them before.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think, especially entering in a space with lived experience, there's folks that have ever heard of a double bind. It's be human, connect. Like, you need to show your experience, but oh my gosh, like, that was messy. That was human. You didn't do that right. Where's the clinical, like, there's a impossibility there that I think we run into. Like, I was terrified of being a human or being perceived as human. I work with somebody now who openly said in a meeting one time, like, and I just told the client, like, I'm human and I just like really messed up. And my jaw could have hit the floor. But that has been transformational to my experience. I mean, I've had sessions recently where I'm like, I'm kind of sucking today. I'm not doing great offering support. What can we do to shift this up? Like, but also being very real. We don't have to pretend like I don't give answers. I'm not perfect. I'm human. Sometimes I show up to session and things click and it feels great. And other times we might be going, we're not connecting today. It's okay. And admitting that is, I mean, the relationship building is wild. In meal coaching, especially, there's been plenty of times where I'm asking something and I'm wrong. And then it's so important for me as like a provider or someone who works with clients to admit that, hey, when I asked you to do that and you said you didn't, you were right. I'm sorry. I like clarified that and I was totally wrong. But that is the relational aspect that's important. That's the humanness and the risk and repair that is so important to relationships with clients. But it's a weird, messy human interaction that we end up with a lot of times.
It goes back to that you can't heal in isolation. So much of your healing is relational based. And it brings up a good point, Abby, because there's so many times where I've had a scheduled call with a client or, a group that I'm leading or a meal that I'm facilitating. And I get my own head about it beforehand. I'm like, oh, I'm really not feeling it. I would rather do anything than go to this because I know I'm not on my game. Or even I'm struggling with my own recovery. And so showing up in these spaces feels very difficult for me. I think being able to bring that into this space is so powerful because it shows people that even though you're in recovery, even though you're trying to help people in recovery, you will have hard days or bad days or things will still trigger you or life will still be lifing. Yeah. And I think it's really important for people to see that. Otherwise, you step into recovery and you get that pink cloud effect that you and I have talked about before, where it's like, everything's going to be great. And then once stuff falls apart, you're like, might as well go back to my old ways because life's bad again. So I think it's really, really important that we do that.
So I think we've touched some of it with human, but I wanted to take time today to talk about burnout and compassion fatigue. It happens all across the field, but particularly when we're using life experience and being vulnerable in different ways, I think there's just a lot to be said about experiencing compassion fatigue, experiencing burnout in the field, and how the heck do we navigate that? I'll share like a little anecdote. I will remember not long after I started working in mental health, I had a client that I got so frustrated with. And I had a very honest conversation with my manager who's like, we've got some serious compassion fatigue. Also identified, I think they remind you of yourself.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Seeing yourself in this position is, I think, like influencing the way that you're like feeling. It's like, okay. But then I was like, well, what the heck do I do? Because I'm still working with this client. This client deserves support. I want to support this client, but I just find myself feeling frustrated. And it really, I had never heard of the term compassion fatigue. And I just thought that, oh, if I'm not feeling super pumped all the time, I'm wrong. Or there's like fault with me, or I'm a horrible person. And this happens all across the field. So have you experienced compassion fatigue before, Gabby? And what did you do with it, if so?
Yeah, I have definitely experienced compassion fatigue. I think, to your point, for me, I think I see myself a little bit in every client that I work with. I think they have some characteristic or attribute that I am able to identify with and work together. In terms of compassion fatigue, absolutely, I've felt it. I think whenever there's a big rift going on in the world as a whole, too, like I'm thinking about the pandemic, when everything felt upside down and twisted, and then you're going out and trying to support people when you don't know what is concrete in the world anymore, and you're trying to guide people through this place, and you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing next. Like, let's try and figure it out together. I think it can be really easy to get lost in the weeds with that kind of stuff. I think for me, a big part of compassion fatigue that has been helpful to me was having management that was supportive. I think that's where I've struggled at our most recent job, is because I was not supported. We didn't get the support that I needed, and I was used to having weekly supervisions where we were processing each of the clients, and then also, once a week, we would meet as a team and talk about these hard cases and brainstorm with each other and talk about those things. And so I think having a supportive team is very, very helpful. Supportive manager, a manager that encourages you to take time off, a manager that encourages you to step away from your computer. And I think that really being vigilant about my own boundaries and not breaking them based on emotions, because sometimes you'll see a client who is stuck. You're worried about them. You are watching them do things and engage in behaviors, and you're like, dude, I care about you so much, and I'm scared to log off, or I'm scared to take my weekend break or go on vacation because I'm worried about you. And at the same time, if you create such a dependence on a coach that your clients cannot spend time by themselves, that is a harmful relationship. They have to be able to be successful when you're not there. And so if they're getting better because of you, that's a problem. They have to be getting better from the tools that you gave them that they're working with. And so I think a big helper to me of compassion fatigue is remembering that I'm not that important, which sounds kind of wild, but I really try to think of myself as just like a tool as opposed to the reason somebody recovered.
That is exactly what came to mind for me. It's, I don't control this person's recovery. I could have never been assigned to this person. I could have never met this person. I would not be responsible. Like, I am not the center. I'm not pulling the strings. I'm not a puppet master. So the fact that I am not willing to let go, or is honestly, that's when I go like, okay, I need to take a look at myself, and like, what am I doing to like hold this, or like, is there some sort of transference? Because this is, especially I work with clients with teams, like I am not the center of this person's world. And if I am, I can't be. So being like very honest and those boundaries and hard reflection, and you have to take time away. You have to take time away. It is so rewarding. I love what I do, and it is exhausting.
Absolutely.
There are plenty of days I just need to like regulate for a little bit after the day, not because it's been a bad day. Sometimes it's been the best day, but there's so much that it's important that if I don't take care of me, I can't make it. And I want to be in this field for the next 20, 30 years. And I cannot let one weekend, like not like taking time away from myself for one weekend. If I can't do that, I can't make it. I have to take that time away, and prioritizing that is as important as I would ask a client to do. Ugh, it's huge.
Maintaining your own well-being is just as important as the direct work that you do with clients in this role. You have to be able to work and be able to take criticism from the experiences and apply them moving forward. So I was constantly doing things and I would have a consequence or a reaction based on them, and I'd have to be like, well, gotta do something different, gotta change this up a little bit, and being flexible and open to that, as opposed to just saying, well, I suck at this and I should just quit. Because if we were basing our ability to be recovery coaches off of the mistakes that we've made, I don't think anybody would still be in the field. So,
and I cannot base my worth as a recovery coach on my client's recovery. That goes nowhere. Because
yes!
I put myself back into the shoes of when I was a client for so long. And I worked with someone who had just started in the field as a therapist. It was horrible to them. The work was impactful. I was horrible. And I left the treatment center and refused to get better. I was not in a headspace where I wanted recovery. And that therapist is a dang good therapist. It has everything to do with where I was at as a client. I cannot base my value in this field based on client outcomes. Of course, I want to see clients do better. Of course, I want to see clients reclaim a life worth living, but I cannot decide if my work is good, if I am enough based on a client's reaction to it.
Absolutely. And it goes the same with that you can't take anything personally in this job as well. So it's not only can you not base your worth on your client's recovery, but you also can't base your worth on experiences with clients. I've had clients who have called me out of my name, who have been super aggressive towards me or confrontational, or the moment that they meet me or come into our meeting, they're like, screw you. And I'm just like, valid with what you're going through. Yeah, I'd probably be telling people that too. And so I think it's just this ability, though, to not get offended with other people's trauma or their coping skills. A lot of people have become confrontational for a reason or have become defensive because of their life experience. And so to write them off because they're going to behave a certain way is not okay. Can you set boundaries? Absolutely. But does this person's, disdain represent your worth as a person? Probably not.
The best example I can give from me when I was a client, I would go into a therapy session, refuse to look at the therapist, and I'd be like, you're not worth looking at. First off, whoa. Second, I would be like, if you keep talking to me, I'm going to throw this phone at your head. Whoa. I was so aggressive, so confrontational, refusing to go into sessions, refusing to look, refusing to sit, refusing to be in a chair. I wanted to make this person's life miserable. I was in that state of mind and in that state of action, and I was stuck in that for a long time. I was very hateful, intentionally harmful. I was so terrified that if anyone got close to me, that I was going to implode, that I was going to do everything to any extent that I needed to keep them away. And that meant me as a client being really horrible to the people that were trying to support me. Is that okay? Absolutely not. But I remind myself of that all the time, that I was vengeful and it had nothing to do with the provider. So in those moments, I feel like if folks have watched the episode where we interview my mom, I just need to be a safe person to hate right now. And that's okay, but it's not me. But it's tough, but I have to put myself back and remember how I was, because I was so horrible to people, and it had absolutely nothing to do with who they are. There's people that I worked with that are top of the line, top-notch people, do so much work. But if you were to look based on my interactions, or if they were to base their worth based on their experience with me, It's
so funny that you say that too, because there are clients like you who were aggressive or confrontational, and that's difficult to work with. I think something can be insidious is somebody who is also like me, who will come into the session and be like, I did everything that you said, and I have worked everything, and I don't have any problems, and just people pleasing to their recovery coaches, I think, is another very common thing. And that's something that we also have to work through, because I remember I had a client at our job who every session I'd meet with her, I'd be like, how are you doing? She'd be like, good. And I was like, really? Then why are we here? Like, what are you doing in treatment then? Like, if we're doing good, then what are we here for? And she would always start laughing, and then we'd actually get into it. But it's funny, and it's interesting, the blueprints that we've been given and how that allows us to navigate our recovery, navigate treatment, all these things.
Dang. There's a lot to this. The mind of a recovery coach, the day in a life. There's so much different scenarios that we find ourselves in, the things that we do, being creative, coming up with connections, building rapport, holding boundaries. There's a heck of a lot to being a recovery coach, and it's really darn valuable to have one. Those people made such a difference in my life. It's the reason I got into this role. Gabby, you've seen the difference it makes in people's lives. So gosh, I feel so fortunate to be like in this role. And it's exciting to get to talk about a position that kind of, I feel like, gets skipped over.
I wholeheartedly agree. And like I said, I don't think I'd be anywhere near where I am today without having become a peer specialist and recovery coach. I don't think that my life would look the same in any way. And so I'm very grateful I've had the opportunity. I'm guaranteeing that we're going to dive into this topic a little bit more, because I'm looking at Abbi and I's notes for this episode, and we left out so many questions that we had to ask each other. So I can't wait to touch back on this again in the future.
Gabby, I do think, though, before we wrap up today's episode, we've talked a lot about the journey that we've been on, navigating it, difficult situations. What's the thing that keeps you coming back to being a recovery coach? What's the favorite part of your job?
My favorite part about working as a recovery coach, it's the little nuggets that people take and then apply to their life, and then they make some small changes, and that feels really cool and exciting. But I also think it's really cool to sit with somebody and say, I see you, and I want to listen to your story, and to know that that means something to myself and to somebody else. Because if I would have been talked to like that when I was really struggling, I think it would have made a really big impact.
Took the words out of my mouth. Getting to hold space, not getting to do anything in particular, but to know that if nothing else, I am going to hold space for this person. I am just going to be here no matter what, if it's appreciated, if it's hated, if it's beneficial, if it feels like I'm grasping at straws, I'm going to hold space here. And that made all the difference for myself.
Just gonna keep showing up. I'm gonna be here even if you hate me. I'm gonna be here even if you don't want to be here. Even if you don't show up, I'm still showing up, and we'll talk about why you didn't show up. So I think it's really cool. Well, thank you all so much for listening to me and Abbi talk about our stories and learn about each other. It's been a really exciting episode. I feel like I've learned so much about you, Abbi. So I feel like we've gotten to learn a lot about ourselves and each other, which is part of our podcast slogan, which I'm excited about.
Absolutely. And y'all, please keep asking us questions. We'll send out stuff on social media, reminders. Hit up our email, firesidesnack@gmail.com. We want to hear it from you. We want to connect with you. We want to talk about things that you want to hear. So please keep in touch, keep listening, and we'll see you back next week.
Fireside Snack is hosted by Abbi Dinges and Gabby Buckner. Editing, music, and artwork by Gabby Buckner. Please email us at firesidesnack@gmail.com with your recovery questions, and be on the lookout for weekly episodes. Thank you for joining us for Fireside Snack and for filling our cups up with gratitude. Enjoy your week.